Hello and welcome to this video giving feedback on the November 2018 series of the Pearson Edexcel GCSE English Language 9-1. My name's Janet Beauman. I'm the Chief Examiner for the Pearson GCSE English Language Specification, and I'll be taking you through some of the key pointers today in the November 2018 series, but also a little bit on how to maximise your marks if you're looking to improve your grade, as most of our candidates in November 2018 were. It's important to say, first of all, that candidates who did well had been practiced in their skills of responding to unseen texts. That's very important. Paper 1 involves an unseen 19th century text, this time round The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. And for Paper 2, students need to respond to two unseen texts, one from the 20th century and one from the 21st century. Students who did well in November were also well skilled in answering all of the questions in the time that they had. That's one skill which is very important in order to maximise the marks that you have available. So I'm going to start by looking at a few quick wins, ways that students can start getting their marks into the bank with the short answer questions. Paper 1, there are two short answer questions. Question 1, which is worth 1 mark, and question 2, which is worth 2 marks. Both of these questions target assessment objective 1, which is identify and interpret explicit and implicit information and ideas. On paper 2, there are 4 short answer questions. Question 1 and question 2, which are worth 2 marks each, and question 4 and question 5, which are worth 1 mark each. From summer 2019, these 4 questions will target assessment objective 1 as well. So you can see already that your students can achieve 6 marks on paper 2 and 3 marks on paper 1 just by answering those short answer questions in a succinct and quick way. The key things to remember for these short answer questions are to make sure that students are using the lines that are specified in the questions. I can't stress that strongly enough. That is so important. Where students didn't achieve marks in November, it was generally because they used the wrong lines. The second thing to do is to always focus on what the question is asking you. There is an identify part to this assessment objective, which is picking out information, but there is also the interpret part, which is where some of the ideas that you're putting into your answer could be implicit in the information you're reading. So, for example, question 1 on paper 1 asked for a word which referenced the colour of the clouds. So it was the clouds specifically. And where students lost marks there were if they just picked out the first word referencing colour that they came to, for example, grey or blue. So students do need to make sure that they are answering the question that's been set on the paper. That's very important. So very easy ways to get a few marks into the bank and move on to the longer questions. For paper 1, question 2, again, focus on the lines that you're asked to focus on, but also make sure that you're answering the question that you've been given, which is ways that the writer shows the narrator is worried. It has to show worry specifically. Again, there is a little bit of interpretation required. But students can get some marks in the bank just by answering those questions, and I'd encourage them to do those first before they move on to the longer questions. Questions 1 and 2 on paper 2, generally students did achieve in November 2018 2 marks each. The difficulty that they had with question 1 was again perhaps not reading the lines carefully enough and understanding the ideas in them. So for example, some students gave the example blessed, and in this case that didn't achieve a mark. The reason being that it didn't refer to the context of the question, which was Mr. White's state of mind. A blessed event was the way that the particular event of pregnancy was described in a newspaper, so it wasn't referencing his feelings. If I focus now on question 3 on both papers, question 3 slightly different between paper 1 and paper 2. On paper 1 it's worth only 6 marks and there are 3 levels of achievement. So the very important key message here is for students to move straight into looking at language and structure. Don't waste time writing an introduction or saying, in this answer I am going to be looking at how the writer is using language and structure. The other key thing for paper 1 achievement is to make sure that you are targeting the lines in the question. In November 2018, it was only lines 12 to 27. Don't comment on examples that are outside of that, because that's not relevant to your answer and won't be credited. Also, make sure on paper 1 that you are referencing the question. And in this case, it was the narrator's thoughts about the people that he meets. So again, going back to that and how language and structure does support that. For this particular question, the key focus on both papers is to make sure that you're commenting on both language and structure. Very few candidates in November 2018 didn't do that. Pretty much every single candidate would make a point on language and a point on structure at least. If you are a student who's trying to achieve a grade 4 or even improve your grade to a grade 5, what you're looking to do is to try and target level 3 on paper 2, so try and achieve a mark of 8. And if you're on paper 1, you're trying to achieve level 2, perhaps a mark of 3 or 4, in order to really start to progress through to grade 4 or grade 5. In order to do that, you need to make sure that you're trying to explain language and structure a bit more, even if you're only making 1 point on paper 1 on language and 1 point on structure, with some appropriate evidence and some explanation of what the writer is doing and how it relates to the question can help you get 2, 3, or maybe even 4 marks there. The same thing applies for paper 2. Comment on both language and structure. Try and move towards that level 3 answer if you're targeting grade 4 and grade 5, and think about going beyond in terms of effects on the reader, language and structure being used to interest and engage the reader, for example. Saying that is just really repeating the question. What you need to do to try and achieve a level 3 mark is to explain more what the writer is doing with language and structure. One key piece of advice I can give students here is to think about who the audience is for the text. In text 1 for paper 2, it was the writer's wife. It's a personal letter written to his wife, and that has an impact on the language and structure used. So go back to that and start to focus your points around that area. Moving on to evaluation, students are asked to evaluate in GCSE English language, and this is assessed in question 4 on paper 1 and question 6 on paper 2. The levels are exactly the same across the 2 papers, and there are 15 marks available over the 2 papers for this particular question. Again, if your students are trying to target grade 4 or improve to grade 5, they need to be at least achieving a mark in level 3, perhaps 8 or even 9 if they want to really try and push towards the 5 and beyond. In order to do that, encourage them to be reassured that they are evaluating every single day, even more so now with the advent of online feedback, posting videos and feedback online. And what they're being asked to do in these questions is to give an opinion. So the first thing to do in this question is decide what your opinion is. Go back to the focus of the question. In paper 1, it was how successful the writer is in showing the narrator's experiences of a future world. Think about yourself as a reader. Do you think he is successful in showing a future world? Do you think he isn't? And if not, why not? Would some readers think he is? Would some readers think he isn't? Those are the kinds of things you need to be doing to achieve level 3 and beyond in this question. For paper 2, what students did particularly well in November 2018 was evaluate how well the writer reassured parents. And it seemed that the style of the text they were looking at really enabled them to be able to come up with an opinion on how reassured parents may be. Some students were able to say, I don't think they would be reassured by it because they're talking about negative things that would happen in a relationship during pregnancy. And that's starting to show the higher level of evaluation. So if I can give students any advice on the evaluation question, it would be decide on your opinion and find evidence and support for your opinion and what you think of it. Even using terms just successfully and effectively is enough to try and achieve a level 3 mark, which is, if you're targeting grade 4 or 5, is where you need to be. Moving on to question 7. Question 7 is only available on paper 2, and it is targeting the second part of AO1, which is selecting and synthesizing information and ideas from the 2 texts, and AO3, which is comparing ideas and perspectives. Again, we noticed in November 2018 that students had at least attempted question 7A, and most had attempted question 7B as well. This is important because there are 20 marks available here, and if you want to try and achieve that grade 4 or grade 5, you need to be trying to achieve at least 4 to 6 marks in 7A and perhaps 7 or 8 marks in question 7B. 7A always talk about similarities, but remember, you're not just making similarities between the 2 texts. You are looking at what the question is asking. And that's where some students this November didn't achieve 6 marks, and it should be fairly straightforward to achieve those 6 marks because this is an AO1 question. Making several similarities available, giving some evidence and giving some synthesis between them should achieve you 6 marks on this question. And that's a very good basis to be going into at the end of your reading questions. The other thing to say is that the focus of the question this November was similarities between the couples in the texts. And sometimes the similarities were more about the texts themselves. Both texts are about pregnancy. That's not specifically about the couples. So if I can give any advice for students trying to get those 6 marks that they should all be able to achieve on question 7A, it would be focus on similarities, focus on the synthesis between the texts, and that's where you go back to the question, the couples in the 2 texts. That's where you're synthesizing your information. For question 7B, the question is targeting assessment objective 3, comparison of ideas and perspectives in the 2 texts. Students are talking about similarities and differences in this question, but they need to be focused on the ideas and perspectives in the texts, not just similarities and differences between the texts themselves. If you're a student attempting to achieve a grade 4 or grade 5 overall, then you need to try and achieve a level 3 answer in this question. So try and get a mark of 7 or 8 in this question. In order to do that, you need to move beyond the level 2 answers, which focus on obvious comparisons. A lot of students in November did make some obvious comparisons. For example, both texts are about pregnancy. For example, both texts are written about couples. Differences such as one is from a letter, one is from a reference book. And obvious comparisons are fine to get your answer started, but if you want to move into level 3, you do need to start to be thinking more about the perspectives of the writers in the text. And this is where advice would be go back to who is the audience for each text, and what is it written for? What is the purpose of it? So the students who were doing better in this answer were commenting on text 1 having a much more personal perspective, because the audience was only ever intended to be one person, which was the writer's wife. He didn't intend for everyone to read this personal letter. The reference book, however, is published for any parent who is experiencing pregnancy, whether for the first time or as a second time round parent. So the perspectives are different, and it's important to say that because that's where you start to move into level 3 and beyond, where you start to make those less obvious comparisons. The final part of each of the exam papers, paper 1 and paper 2, is a writing question. Some students do take the strategy of approaching this question after they've done their short answer questions, and this can be quite an effective strategy to maximise marks, because students are thinking there are 40 marks available just for this one question, 24 marks for AO5, 16 marks for AO6. So sometimes that can be an effective strategy if students want to try and really get their marks up from the beginning. It's not essential, but it is a piece of advice that you may want to pass on to your students. Again, the students have a choice of a task here. Imaginative writing, they have a choice of 2 tasks, one which has some images to inspire writing, and transactional writing, again, they have a choice of 2 tasks. In the November 2018 series, there was fairly even spread across both writing tasks on both papers. Some were done better than others, and the key message I would give you to pass on to your students is if they want to target a grade 4 or grade 5, they should be aiming for at least 12 marks for AO5 and 8 marks for AO6. And there are some key ways to do that. The first place that examiners always go to is the first bullet point of the AO5 mark scheme. Has the piece been written for an appropriate sense of audience and purpose? Does the student try and target an audience and purpose? And that's quite important in the sense of, do you have an idea of who you're writing for? For the speech on paper 2, which was question 8, there did tend to be a very clear sense of the audience, but what students tended to lack in the November series was the ideas to really support and develop their answer. This is part of the second bullet point of AO5, which is the development and connection of ideas and information. You do have to have that connection of ideas in order to achieve at least level 3 in the writing question. Connection of ideas comes from having that sense of where I'm starting from and where I'm going to. And students who did the first question on imaginative writing, the one where they made something, tended to have very clear connections between their ideas because they were thinking about a process of making something. So they were able to follow that connection through in their response. Connecting ideas will probably encourage students to end up at the bottom of level 3. In order to get to the top of level 3, you need to be trying to develop those ideas a bit more. Add some more flesh to the bones, if you like. Give a bit more information about why your mum is the most inspirational person in your life. Say a bit more about what it is that she does. So there needs to be development as well as a number of ideas that you are targeting in your answer. Think about organisation, which is the final part of AO5. Have a clear opening, middle, end, clear direction of how you're going to get there. Clear paragraphs, and you can think about structural and grammatical features, so short sentences, headings, for example, in your writing in order to structure it to achieve that level 3 mark. In terms of AO6, key messages are check your work, proofread it, think about your spelling, and think about your punctuation. Try and use varied vocabulary. Try and vary the words that are being used. That's what a level 3 answer is doing. It is targeting varied vocabulary, mostly spelled correctly. However, if you're trying to be ambitious in your use of vocabulary, but your spelling isn't reflected in that extensive use of vocabulary, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We do credit ambitious vocabulary even if the student hasn't been successful in their spelling of it. Also, to try and move from a grade 4 to a grade 5 sort of level writing response, think about moving from accurate punctuation to varied use of punctuation. Students quite often get very worried about what does it mean to have accurate punctuation, and I would encourage them to use punctuation that they know and that they can use. Don't use a semicolon if you're not really sure how you're supposed to use it, but also if you are using varied punctuation, it doesn't have to be things like semicolons. It could be parenthesis, it could be ellipsis, it could be quotation marks. So try and incorporate a bit of that if you're trying to move from a grade 4 to a grade 5. So some key messages are planning and organisation in writing. Students who did a plan in November 2018 were well served by that plan because it just gave them a direction. Move from not just connecting your ideas to developing them if you're trying to move towards a grade 5 from a grade 4. And also thinking about varying the words that you're using, the punctuation that you're using, and also trying to use a variety of sentence structures. Questions, for example, exclamations. And that should achieve you at least 12 plus 8 marks, which is what you need to be targeting to get grade 4, grade 5. I hope that's been useful for you. Good luck to all of you and to all of your students in the future. Thank you.